This row is reserved for premium passengers who belong here, not people who got lucky with an upgrade." The words hung in the air of SkyLine Airlines' first-class cabin, sharp and deliberate. Several passengers glanced up from their pre-flight routines, eyes darting toward the commotion in row 2. Elise Morgan hadn't expected conflict when she boarded flight SL-247 from Los Angeles to New York. Dressed in a simple navy blazer and tailored black pants, comfortable yet professional, she looked like any other business traveler. Her hair was pulled back into a neat bun, minimal makeup accenting her deep brown skin and high cheekbones. No designer logos, no flashy jewelry. Just a woman with a well-worn leather tote and a quiet confidence that didn't ask for attention. Few would have recognized Elise as the CEO of SkyLine Airlines. That was intentional. Today wasn't about optics or visibility. It was about understanding the passenger experience firsthand. After 3 months of implementing new service protocols, she wanted to see the results without the artificial polish that inevitably appeared whenever staff knew executives were watching. Elise glanced at her boarding pass once more. Seat 2A, window. Her preference for long flights where she could lean against the wall and catch a few hours of sleep between reviewing quarterly reports. "Excuse me," she said, voice measured and calm. "I believe you're in my seat." The man, mid-50s, expensive watch, glinting beneath a crisp white cuff, silver hair, perfectly coiffed, didn't bother looking up from his phone. "I need the extra space," he replied dismissively. "There's plenty of room in row 4. The attendant can help you." Elise didn't move. Moments like these weren't new to her. She'd encountered them throughout her career, first as an intern at a regional airline, where executives asked her to fetch coffee despite her finance degree from Howard University. Later as a VP being mistaken for an assistant during board presentations. Even now as the first black female CEO of a major U.S. airline. She'd learned to recognize these moments for what they were, not just inconveniences, but tests. Tests of whether she would accept being moved, diminished, relocated for someone else's comfort. "I'm not asking to switch," she said, her voice firm but not aggressive. "This is my assigned seat." Around them, the first-class cabin buzzed with pre-departure energy. A businessman tucked his briefcase under the seat ahead. A woman in designer sunglasses sipped complimentary champagne. A flight attendant welcomed passengers with practiced warmth. Elise thought about the journey that had brought her here, not just to this flight, but to this position. Her father, a mechanic for a small regional airline, coming home with stories about planes and distant cities. Her mother, a high school science teacher, pushing her toward mathematics when counselors suggested more suitable careers. The countless nights studying aircraft specifications, fuel calculations, and business models while classmates partied. "Sir," she tried again. "I need to take my seat now. We'll be departing soon." The man finally looked up. Ice blue eyes assessing her from head to toe. His expression shifted from annoyance to something more calculated. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. Voice lowered but edged with warning. Elise did. Richard Whitman, major SkyLine shareholder, board member who had vocally opposed her appointment as CEO 18 months ago, arguing that she lacked sufficient industry experience despite her 15 years in aviation management and 2 successful company turnarounds. "Yes, Mr. Whitman," she replied calmly. "I do know who you are." Confusion flickered across his face. Then suspicion. He hadn't expected recognition. But before he could respond, a flight attendant approached Sophia Turner. Blonde hair pulled into a perfect bun uniform, crisp and spotless. "Is everything all right here?" Sophia asked, her eyes darting between Richard and Elise, hesitation visible in her posture. Richard straightened, adjusting his tie. "Everything's fine. This lady seems confused about seating arrangements. Perhaps you could help her find her correct seat." Sophia glanced at Elise, then at the boarding pass she held. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass, please?" Elise handed it over without comment. She watched Sophia's eyes widen slightly as she confirmed the seat assignment. Sir Sophia said carefully this passenger is indeed assigned to 2A. Richard's jaw tightened. I specifically requested this row. Check again. Elise remained silent. She'd seen this play out before, not just with herself, but with countless other passengers. The moment when privilege encountered a boundary and pushed harder, assuming rules were merely suggestions that could be bent with enough pressure. I understand, Mr. Whitman, but our system shows you're assigned to 2B. Sophia, replied her customer service smile never wavering. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding during check-in. Richard looked directly at Elise, now eyes narrowing. I'm sure we can work something out. I have a back condition that requires extra space. Medical necessity. Elise simply held her ground. Not aggressive, not confrontational, just unmoved. She had spent her entire career perfecting the delicate balance of assertiveness without being labeled difficult or angry, a tightrope that women, especially black women, walked daily in corporate America. I'm happy to remain in my assigned seat, Elise said quietly. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. That seat belongs to people who can afford it, not people who sneak in. Richard hissed his voice, dropping to an aggressive whisper as he leaned closer to Elise. The deliberate insult hung between them, causing several nearby passengers to shift uncomfortably. A man in 1C removed his headphones, brow furrowed as he observed the escalating tension. Elise felt the familiar weight settle in her chest, the heaviness that came whenever someone tried to remind her of what they perceived as her proper place. She'd felt it in boardrooms, at executive retreats, even at her own welcome reception when an investor had asked her to refill his drink, assuming she was catering staff. Mr. Whitman, she replied evenly, I understand your preference, but this is my assigned seat. I'd appreciate taking it now. Around them, the first-class cabin had grown quieter. A woman across the aisle pretended to be absorbed in her magazine, but her eyes weren't moving across the page. A man 2 rows ahead had removed his headphones. Sophia Turner, the flight attendant, shifted her weight from one foot to another, clearly uncomfortable. Sir, perhaps I can offer you a complimentary drink while we sort this out? Sophia suggested, defaulting to appeasement. Richard ignored her, his focus laser-sharp on Elise. Do you have any idea who you're inconveniencing right now? I'm on the board of this airline. I'm aware, Elise said simply. Something in her calm demeanor seemed to unnerve him. He'd expected defensiveness, perhaps apologies, not this composed certainty. Well then, he continued, voice rising slightly. You should understand that some accommodations are made for people who actually contribute to this airline's success. I don't think it's too much to ask that I get the seat I need. A younger flight attendant appeared beside Sophia. Her name tag read, Teresa Ramirez. Unlike Sophia, whose discomfort was evident, Teresa's expression showed controlled concern. Is there a problem here? Teresa asked her question directed more toward Sophia than the passengers. This gentleman is in my assigned seat, Elise explained before Sophia could answer. Teresa glanced at Richard, then at Elise's boarding pass that Sophia still held. Sir, I can see you're in 2B according to our manifest. The window seat belongs to this passenger. Richard's face flushed. I specifically requested accommodations for my back. Your airline promised me the window seat. Teresa took the electronic tablet from Sophia and checked something. I don't see any medical accommodation request in your booking, Mr. Whitman. If you'd like to file one for future travel, I'm happy to assist you after takeoff. Elise observed Teresa's professionalism with quiet appreciation. This was exactly the kind of customer service standard she'd been working to implement, respectful but firm, not bending rules based on perceived status. Richard abruptly stood towering over both women. This is ridiculous. Get me your supervisor. His sudden movement caused his leather portfolio to fall, spilling papers across the floor. As he bent to gather them, he muttered loudly enough for surrounding passengers to hear, This is what happens when standards drop. Everyone thinks they deserve first class now. The implication wasn't subtle. Several passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Teresa maintained her composure. "Sir, we'll need to prepare for departure soon. Perhaps we could—" "No," Richard interrupted. "I'm not moving until I speak with someone who has actual authority." He turned to Elise, his voice dripping with condescension. "You can wait in the galley. This won't take long." Elise had remained silent during the exchange, watching assessing. Now she spoke, her voice quiet but clear. "Mr. Whitman, I understand you're upset, but I will be sitting in my assigned seat." From her peripheral vision, Elise noticed a man observing from near the cockpit entrance, James Cooper SkyLine's head of operations. He caught her eye briefly, a nearly imperceptible nod passing between them. Richard seemed to interpret her calm as weakness. He stepped closer. "Listen, sweetheart," he said, voice lowered to a near growl. "I don't know if this is your first time in first class, but there's an unspoken code up here. Flexibility, courtesy, understanding who belongs and who's just passing through." A cell phone camera discreetly rose from 3 rows back. "I belong in seat 2A, Elise replied simply, "and I'm not passing through." "You're making a mistake," Richard said, his voice hard as flint. "I can make one call and have your frequent flyer status revoked. Is that really worth it for a window seat?" Elise met his gaze steadily. She didn't respond to the threat, knowing it was empty, not because she was CEO, but because even a regular passenger couldn't have their status revoked over a legitimate seating dispute. Sophia stepped forward, anxiety evident in her tight smile. "Perhaps we could offer you a complimentary upgrade on your return flight, sir." As a gesture of goodwill, Elise noticed how quickly the solution involved rewarding the problematic behavior rather than enforcing the rules. It was precisely this pattern she'd been working to change. "That won't be necessary," Elise said before Richard could answer. "I'll be taking my assigned seat." Richard's expression darkened. He pulled out his phone, tapping aggressively. "Let's see what Jeremy Hayes has to say about this. He's only the CFO of this entire airline." Elise knew Jeremy wouldn't answer. He was in Tokyo for investor meetings she had personally approved last week. More passengers were watching now, some openly filming with their phones. The confrontation had crossed some invisible threshold from personal disagreement to public spectacle. Teresa moved closer to Sophia, whispering something in her ear. Sophia's eyes widened slightly before she regained her professional demeanor. "Mr. Whitman," Teresa said, stepping forward, "our departure time is approaching. FAA regulations require all passengers to be properly seated before we can begin taxiing." "I am properly seated," he snapped. "In someone else's assigned seat." Teresa clarified her tone, respectful but firm. A heavy-set man in seat 3C chuckled, earning a glare from Richard. Richard turned back to Elise, studying her more carefully now. "Have we met before?" "You look familiar." "We have," Elise replied simply. Something in her tone made him pause, recalculation visible in his eyes. Before he could pursue that line of thought, Richard abruptly switched tactics. He smiled, all charm now. "Look, clearly we've gotten off on the wrong foot. I apologize if I seemed abrupt. It's been a stressful morning, meetings, running late, traffic from downtown. Why don't we start over, Richard Whitman?" He extended his hand. Elise didn't take it. "Elise Morgan." The name registered. Richard's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he recovered. "Morgan, any relation to William Morgan at First Capital?" "No," she replied. His smile tightened. This wasn't going as planned. "Sir," Sophia interjected, "we really do need to resolve this seating situation before departure." Richard turned his attention to her. "Call the gate agent. I want this sorted properly." "The manifest is clear," Teresa said. 2A belongs to Ms. Morgan." Richard's phone buzzed. He checked it, a satisfied smirk appearing. "Well, it seems I have support from above. My colleague Thomas Edwards, Senior VP of Customer Experience, suggests we accommodate my medical needs. He showed the screen to Sophia. Elise knew Thomas well. They'd clashed repeatedly over service standards during her first year as CEO. Thomas believed in high-value customer prioritization, essentially giving preferential treatment to wealthy passengers, regardless of the situation. He was also one of Richard's closest allies on the board. "That's not official protocol," Teresa stated carefully. "It's common sense," Richard countered, voice rising. "Do you realize what I pay annually for my executive platinum status? More than you make in 3 months." A woman across the aisle gasped softly at his rudeness. "Income doesn't determine seating assignments," Teresa replied, maintaining remarkable composure. "Your boarding pass does." Richard's demeanor changed again, this time to one of exaggerated patience, as though explaining something to a child. "Listen, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. I requested 2A specifically due to my back condition. Your system assigned me 2B. Rather than making this into a federal case, why not simply correct the error?" "There's no error to correct," Elise said quietly. Richard turned to her, expression hardening. "No one asked you." "Actually," Elise continued as the passenger assigned to 2A, "I'm directly involved in this conversation." The cabin had grown very quiet now. Even passengers pretending not to watch were openly staring. James Cooper moved closer from his position near the galley, watching intently. He caught Elise's eye again, raising an eyebrow in silent question. She gave a subtle shake of her head. "Not yet." Richard noticed the exchange and misinterpreted it. Finally, someone with actual authority. "Sir, could you please explain to your staff that accommodating medical needs takes precedence over arbitrary seat assignments?" James kept his expression carefully neutral. "I'll need to review the situation." "It's quite simple," Richard said with exaggerated patience. "I require the window seat for my back condition. This woman refuses to move despite multiple reasonable alternatives being offered." "I see," James replied, glancing at Elise's boarding pass. "And you believe your need supersedes the assigned seating arrangement?" "Obviously," Richard said. "It's called customer service. Perhaps you should remind your staff of that concept." Teresa's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Do you have documentation for this medical condition?" James asked. Richard's face reddened. "I shouldn't need to carry a doctor's note to receive basic accommodations. Company policy requires medical documentation for specific seating accommodations," James explained. "Otherwise, we honor the seating assignments as issued." Richard's phone buzzed again. He checked it, then looked up with renewed confidence. "Thomas Edwards is calling the captain directly. This will be resolved properly now." Elise knew the captain, Diane Reynolds' 20-year veteran exemplary record. She also knew Diane wouldn't bend safety protocols or company policies even for an executive. "While we wait for that call," Elise said calmly, "perhaps we could all take our assigned seats so the flight isn't delayed." "I'm not moving," Richard declared, settling more firmly into 2A. "And you can't make me." Elise didn't respond immediately to Richard's declaration. Instead, she stood perfectly still, her expression neutral as she regarded him. The moment stretched, the silence becoming its own form of communication more powerful than any argument could have been. Richard shifted uncomfortably in the seat that wasn't his. He had expected anger tears, or retreat, the usual responses to his intimidation. This calm, unwavering presence was something else entirely. "Is there a problem here?" A new voice broke the tension. An older passenger, gray-haired, distinguished, wearing a cardigan, despite the Los Angeles heat, had risen from his seat in 1B. "No problem," Richard answered quickly. "Just a seating misunderstanding." "Doesn't look like a misunderstanding to me," the man observed. "Looks like you're in that lady's seat." Several passengers nodded in agreement. Richard's face flushed deeper. "This doesn't concern you. When someone's bullying another passenger, it concerns all of us," the man replied evenly. Elise appreciated the support but maintained her composed silence. She'd learned long ago that in certain situations, speaking less gave her words more weight when she did choose to use them. Her mind drifted briefly to a moment 15 years earlier, her first executive meeting at Regional Air, where she'd been the only woman and the only person of color in a room of 12. Every time she'd spoken, someone had interrupted or spoken over her. By the third occurrence, she'd simply stopped mid-sentence and remained silent until the interrupter grew uncomfortable and stopped talking. The room had grown quiet. "Please continue," Elise, the CEO, had finally said. No one interrupted her again that day. Now standing in the aisle of a first-class cabin, she employed that same strategic silence. Sophia cleared her throat nervously. "Sir, we'll need everyone properly seated for departure." "I am seated," Richard snapped. "Not in your assigned seat," Teresa pointed out. James Cooper stepped forward. "Mr. Whitman, I've just received confirmation from the captain. Unless you have documented medical requirements on file, we need to honor the original seat assignments." Richard's expression shifted to one of disbelief. "This is outrageous. Do you have any idea how much business I bring to this airline? SkyLine values all its passengers?" James replied diplomatically. "Some more than others, apparently," Richard muttered, glaring at Elise. The subtext wasn't lost on anyone in earshot. A woman in row 3 shook her head in disgust. Elise finally broke her silence. "Mr. Whitman, I understand you're frustrated, but this isn't a negotiation. It's a simple matter of assigned seating." The calm authority in her voice seemed to catch Richard off guard. "Who exactly do you think you are?" he demanded. Elise didn't answer the question directly. Someone who expects to sit in her assigned seat without harassment. Richard turned to Sophia. "I want to speak with the captain. The captain is preparing for departure." Sophia replied, visibly uncomfortable with the continuing confrontation. "Then delay the departure," Richard insisted. Teresa exchanged a glance with James. "Sir, we can't delay a flight for a seating preference." "This is beyond ridiculous," Richard declared, pulling out his phone again. "I'm calling Jeremy directly. CFO Hayes is currently in Tokyo," Elise noted quietly. 13 hours ahead. It's approximately 3 a.m. there now." Richard paused, suspicion flaring. How would you know that Elise didn't respond, letting the question hang in the air? A soft murmur rippled through the cabin as passengers speculated about her identity. The man filming from row 5 zoomed in. Sir James said with finality, "I need to ask you one last time to move to your assigned seat so we can prepare for departure." Richard stared at him, then at Elise, calculation evident in his expression. Finally, with deliberate slowness, he gathered his belongings. "This isn't over," he said to Elise as he stood. "I don't know who you are or what you think you're accomplishing, but trust me, you'll regret making an enemy today." Elise remained expressionless as Richard moved to 2B, making a show of adjusting his seat and sighing dramatically. As she finally took her rightful place in 2A, Elise caught Teresa's eye. The young flight attendant gave her a barely perceptible nod of respect. Settling into her seat, Elise gazed out the window at the LAX tarmac. Planes taxied in measured patterns, ground crew moved with practiced efficiency, a complex choreography where everyone knew their place and purpose. She thought about her father, who'd spent 40 years as an aircraft mechanic. "Planes don't care who you are, Ellie," he'd told her once. "Rich or poor, famous or nobody, if something's out of place, that bird ain't flying. Nature's great equalizer." The memory brought a slight smile to her lips. In row 32, she knew another confrontation was brewing, one that would force her hand in ways this minor skirmish hadn't. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket. A text from James Situation in Economy. Hispanic woman and son seat 32B. Passenger complaints. The peace she'd fought for in first class was merely the beginning. The real test was about to unfold. As the pre-flight announcements began, Richard pulled out his phone despite the instructions to switch to airplane mode. His fingers moved rapidly across the screen, composing a message with barely contained fury. Emergency situation. Morgan on SL-247. Confrontation in progress. She doesn't know I recognize her. Need immediate backup. He sent the text to a group thread labeled Board Strategy. 3 dots appeared almost instantly, indicating someone was typing a response. Elise observed this from the corner of her eye, pretending to review documents from her leather portfolio. She didn't need to see the message to understand what was happening. Richard's reaction upon hearing her name had confirmed her suspicions he was part of the faction on SkyLine's board that had been working to undermine her leadership since day one. Thomas Edwards replied, "First. Confirmed on flight details ASAP. Then, William Lancaster, keep it contained. Media disaster if this goes public." Richard's expression shifted to grim satisfaction as he typed, "Already public. Passengers filming. Need damage control now." Across the country in SkyLine's New York headquarters, Nancy Blackwell's phone chimed with an urgent alert. As SVP of Public Relations, she had configured notifications for any social media mentions that included specific keywords, SkyLine CEO confrontation or discrimination. The alert showed a Twitter post already gaining traction, watching rich white guy try to bully black woman out of her seat on #SkyLine First Class. She's not backing down. Respect. Flight drama. Nancy's practiced eye immediately recognized the potential crisis. She fired off a quick message to her team potential situation on SL-247. Monitor all platforms. Prepare for rapid response. Nancy paused, then typed a second message. Check if Elise is on that flight. While devoted to her job, Nancy had always been uncomfortable with Thomas Edwards's faction on the board. Their push for premium customer prioritization often felt like thinly veiled elitism to her. If Elise was involved, Nancy wanted to be prepared to help. Back on the aircraft, James Cooper moved discreetly through the cabin, stopping near Richard's seat. "Sir, I'll need to ask you to switch your phone to airplane mode now." Richard looked up, irritation evident. "One moment. Important business communication. I'm afraid FAA regulations don't make exceptions for important business," James replied evenly. Richard lowered his voice. "Listen, you clearly don't understand what's happening here. That woman," he tilted his head toward Elise, "is Elise Morgan." "I'm aware, sir." "Then you should know that she's been making radical changes that threaten this airline's profitability. The board has serious concerns about her leadership." James maintained his professional demeanor, but inwardly he felt a twinge of discomfort. He'd been impressed by Elise's leadership since she took over as CEO, particularly her focus on consistent service standards. However, his mentor Thomas Edwards had made it clear that siding with Elise could limit his career advancement. "Sir, my concern right now is ensuring this flight departs safely and on time. Please switch your device to airplane mode." Richard reluctantly complied, but not before sending one final message: activate contingency plan. This ends today. In the cabin, Teresa approached with pre-departure beverages. Water or champagne, she offered Elise. "Water, please." When Teresa returned with the drink, she leaned slightly closer than necessary. "There's a situation developing in economy," she whispered. "Young boy and mother being harassed by another passenger. Heather is handling it, but—" She left the implication hanging. Elise nodded almost imperceptibly. "Thank you, Teresa." Richard watched this exchange with narrowed eyes. Passing gossip to passengers now. How professional. Teresa straightened. "Just providing excellent service, sir. It's what SkyLine prides itself on." As she moved away, Richard turned to Elise. "You seem quite friendly with the staff." "Frequent flyer?" You could say that Elise replied neutrally. Let me guess, consultant nonprofit. Whatever it is, you certainly made a mountain out of a molehill over a simple seat request. Elise took a sip of water. It wasn't a request. It was my assigned seat. Richard's phone vibrated in his pocket. Despite the airplane mode, texts could still arrive if sent before the signal was cut off. He discreetly checked it. The message from Thomas Edwards read, "Nancy confirms trending online. Damage assessment underway. Do not escalate with Morgan. Repeat, do not escalate." Too late, Richard thought. The confrontation had already gone too far to quietly resolve. Meanwhile, in the back of the plane, Heather Johnson stood in the aisle beside row 32, where Michael Taylor sat beside his mother Denise. Across from them, an agitated man in his 40s complained loudly. "I shouldn't have to sit next to someone who can't control their child," the man insisted, though Michael was sitting quietly reading a book about airplanes. "Sir, the child is behaving appropriately," Heather responded loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "He keeps looking at my laptop," the man claimed. "It has sensitive work information." Denise Taylor spoke up, her voice steady but strained. "My son hasn't looked at your laptop. He's been reading his book since we sat down." "Ma'am, I know what I saw," the man insisted. Heather shifted uncomfortably, glancing between the two passengers. Despite recent training on unbiased conflict resolution, her instinct was to appease the complainant, particularly one who looked like a business traveler. "Perhaps we could find alternative seating for you and your son," she suggested to Denise. Denise's expression hardened. "We haven't done anything wrong. Why should we have to move?" A text appeared on Elise's phone, a secure message through SkyLine's internal communication system. It was from Operations Incident in Progress Row 32. Passenger alleging child invasion of privacy. Staff member Johnson, escalating rather than resolving. Elise's jaw tightened slightly. This was the exact type of situation her new training protocols were designed to address. Judgment calls that respected the dignity of all passengers, rather than automatically appeasing the loudest complainant. She wrote back, "Monitor. Do not intervene yet." At the same time, Nancy Blackwell was watching the situation unfold through social media. A new video had appeared, this one from economy class. Now white passenger harassing black kid and mom in economy on same SkyLine flight. Flight attendant taking his side. This airline has serious issues. Hatch double standard. The video was being shared rapidly with comments connecting the two incidents and questioning SkyLine's culture. Nancy messaged Thomas Edwards. Critical situation developing. Both incidents on same flight trending simultaneously. Need executive response ASAP. Thomas replied immediately. Whitman says CEO on flight. Confirm, Nancy. What Morgan is on that flight, Thomas? Apparently in first class, part of confrontation with Whitman. Nancy felt her stomach drop. What had started as a PR concern was rapidly evolving into a potential company-defining moment. But rather than feeling dread, Nancy felt a strange sense of anticipation. Perhaps this was the catalyst needed to address issues she'd long observed but felt powerless to change. Back in first class, Richard was growing increasingly agitated as he pieced together what was happening. He leaned toward Elise. "You planned this, didn't you?" he accused in a harsh whisper. "Some kind of staged confrontation to make yourself look good." Elise turned to face him directly. "Mr. Whitman, I didn't plan for you to take my seat, nor did I plan for you to refuse to move when asked. Those were your choices. This isn't about the seat," he hissed. "This is about your agenda, turning everything into an issue of race or gender to distract from your mismanagement of this airline." Elise's expression remained impassive, but her voice hardened slightly. "My management of this airline has increased profitability by 22% in 18 months. Improved on-time performance by 17%, and reduced customer complaints by a third. Those aren't distractions, Mr. Whitman. Those are results. You knew who I was from the beginning. Yes. And you deliberately created this confrontation. No, Mr. Whitman. You did that all on your own. The situation in economy class was deteriorating rapidly. Heather Johnson stood with her arms crossed, speaking in a voice pitched to carry over the ambient noise of the cabin. Sir, I understand your concerns, but I've been observing for several minutes and haven't seen any inappropriate behavior from the child. The passenger, a middle-aged white man in an expensive suit, grew more agitated. Are you calling me a liar? I know what I saw. 11-year-old Michael Taylor shrunk deeper into his seat, pressing against his mother's side. Denise placed a protective arm around his shoulders, her expression a careful mask, hiding the anger and hurt beneath. My son is reading his book about aviation, Denise explained, her voice controlled. He wants to be a pilot someday. He hasn't been looking at your laptop. Maybe you should watch him more carefully instead of defending him automatically, the man retorted. Several nearby passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. A woman in 33C made eye contact with Denise, offering a sympathetic smile. Teresa Ramirez had made her way from first class to assess the situation. She observed from the rear galley, her concern growing as she watched Heather's handling of the complaint. Perhaps we could find you another seat, sir, Heather suggested to the agitated passenger, her tone apologetic. I know it's uncomfortable when you're trying to work. Teresa's brow furrowed. The suggestion implied the Taylors were the problem, not the man making unfounded accusations. I shouldn't have to move, the man insisted. I paid for this specific seat. Denise straightened in her seat. So did we. Heather turned to her. Ma'am, please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. The comment sent a ripple of whispers through nearby rows. A passenger in 34A pulled out his phone and began recording discreetly. How exactly am I making things difficult? Denise asked, her composure remarkable given the circumstances. By expecting my son to be treated with basic respect. Michael looked up at his mother, then at Heather. I'm sorry if I did something wrong, he said softly. The sincerity in his voice made several passengers shift uncomfortably. He clearly hadn't done anything to apologize for. You've done nothing wrong, baby Denise assured him, then looked directly at Heather. And I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't imply that he has. Teresa stepped forward finally. Is everything okay here? Heather turned surprise, registering briefly. I'm handling this, Teresa. I can see that Teresa replied evenly. What seems to be the issue? The complaining passenger jumped in before Heather could answer. This kid keeps looking at my confidential work materials. I've asked him to stop multiple times. That's not true, Michael said quietly. I've been reading my book. Teresa glanced at the book in Michael's hands. Junior Encyclopedia of Aviation, well worn with colorful tabs marking favorite pages. He's been engrossed in that book since boarding confirmed the woman in 33C. Hasn't looked up except when this man started complaining. Heather's expression tightened. We need to respect all our passengers' concerns. Absolutely, Teresa agreed. Which is why we should be objective about what's actually happening. She turned to the man. Sir, we take privacy concerns seriously. However, multiple passengers confirm the child has been focused on his book, not your screen. Are you calling me a liar? He demanded, echoing his earlier accusation against Heather. Not at all, Teresa replied calmly. I'm saying there might be a misunderstanding. Perhaps reflections on your screen made it appear someone was watching when they weren't. The diplomatic suggestion offered him a way to back down without losing face. He hesitated, glancing around at the increasingly unsympathetic faces surrounding him. News of the confrontation had reached first class. A passenger returning from the lavatory leaned toward her seatmate, voice just loud enough for Elise to overhear. There's some man in economy harassing a little black boy and his mom. Making wild accusations about the kid spying on his laptop or something. Richard caught the comment too, his expression darkening as he pieced together the connection. Quite the coincidence, he muttered to Elise. 2 similar incidents on one flight. Elise didn't respond, but she discreetly checked her phone. The updates from operations were concerning. Heather Johnson had initially sided with the complainant, despite evidence to the contrary, exactly the type of bias the new training was meant to address. James Cooper appeared at Elise's side, bending down as if checking on her drink preference. "Both incidents are trending on social media," he whispered, "being connected as examples of company culture." Elise nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Status of economy situation." Teresa intervened. Tension decreased, but not resolved. "Thank you, James." As he moved away, Richard leaned closer. "Quite the cozy relationship with the staff. One might almost think you were someone important." Elise met his gaze directly. "Everyone is important, Mr. Whitman. That's precisely the point." In economy, James had positioned himself strategically near row 32, providing a subtle but clear message of support to Teresa's approach. Heather noticed this shift in dynamics, her confidence visibly wavering. "Perhaps I've misunderstood the situation," she conceded reluctantly. "The child does appear to be focused on his book." The complaining passenger realized his position was weakening. "Fine," he muttered, "but I'll be filing a formal complaint about how this was handled." "You're welcome to do so," Teresa replied professionally. "We document all passenger concerns thoroughly." As the tension eased slightly, Michael tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, "can we still stay on the plane? I really want to see the takeoff." The simple request, revealing his continued enthusiasm for aviation, despite the upsetting encounter, touched several nearby passengers. The woman in 33C discreetly wiped a tear. "Of course we can stay, honey," Denise assured him, though her own expression remained guarded. The incident had left its mark regardless of the resolution. Teresa knelt beside their seats. "Michael, I noticed your aviation book. Are you interested in becoming a pilot?" His face brightened instantly. "Yes, I'm learning all about different planes. Did you know the Boeing 787 has special windows that get darker with a button instead of pull-down shades?" Teresa smiled genuinely. "I did know that. In fact, I worked on those planes when they first joined our fleet." As they chatted briefly about aviation, Denise's shoulders relaxed slightly. This simple act of human connection, acknowledging her son's passion, rather than treating him with suspicion, meant more than any formal resolution could have. Meanwhile, James received a message from Elise status update on both situations. He replied, "First class stable, but tense. Economy stabilizing after Teresa's intervention. Heather compliant, but resistant. Social media coverage expanding rapidly." Elise considered this information carefully. 2 separate incidents on one flight, both involving similar patterns of bias, both now public through passenger recordings. The situation had evolved beyond a simple seating dispute into a moment that could define SkyLine's approach to passenger dignity. Her decision crystallized. This wasn't just about one confrontation or even 2, it was about the pattern they represented and the culture they revealed. With quiet determination, she opened the secure communication channel to Captain Reynolds. "Diane, this is Elise. We need to implement Protocol 47. On the flight deck, Captain Reynolds received the message with immediate understanding. Protocol 47, recently implemented by Elise, authorized immediate action in situations involving potential discrimination that affected passenger dignity and safety. "Understood," she replied. Taking command. "Yes," Elise confirmed. Gate return authorized. In economy, Michael had returned to his book, temporarily distracted from the tension around him. Denise, however, remained vigilant, her trust in the situation fragile at best. Teresa noticed her wariness. "Ms. Taylor," she said quietly, "I want to assure you this situation is being addressed at the highest levels." "I've heard that before," Denise replied skeptically. "Usually nothing changes. This time it will," Teresa promised with a certainty that surprised even herself. Moments later, the cabin speakers activated with Captain Reynolds's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to an ongoing situation that requires attention, our departure will be delayed. We've been instructed to return to the gate. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened while we complete this process." A collective groan rose from the cabin. In first class, Richard's face flushed with anger as he turned to Elise. "This is your doing, isn't it?" For the first time, Elise allowed a hint of her authority to show. "Yes, Mr. Whitman, it is." Captain Diane Reynolds's voice came through Elise's secure line, clear and professional. "We have a situation, Elise. I'm aware. 2 situations, actually. 3 now. Thomas Edwards has contacted me directly claiming board authority to handle the matters without your involvement. He's demanding we proceed with departure immediately." Elise gazed out the window at the LAX tarmac, watching as another SkyLine aircraft taxied past. The company logo, a stylized horizon with wings, gleamed in the California sunlight. The symbol had always represented possibility to her, the promise that anyone could rise above their circumstances. "What's your assessment of the economy cabin incident?" Elise asked. Diane's response was measured. "Based on crew reports, we have a passenger making unfounded accusations against a child with our senior cabin attendant, showing concerning bias in handling the situation, and the response from other passengers. Multiple witnesses contradict the complaining passenger's claims. Several are recording. The footage is already appearing online alongside the incident in first class." Elise closed her eyes briefly, thinking of Michael Taylor and his aviation book. A child with dreams of flying learning his first painful lesson about which passengers were deemed credible and which were considered suspect. Her mind flashed back to her own childhood, 8 years old, flying standby thanks to her father's employee benefits. She'd been so excited to see the cockpit, but a flight attendant had stopped her, assuming she was wandering without permission. "Where are your parents?" the woman had demanded, despite Elise's explanation. "These areas aren't for playing." Her father had found her in tears. A familiar doubt crept in. Was she overreacting, making a simple dispute about more than it was? The rational executive part of her mind cautioned against drastic measures that might be perceived as emotional rather than strategic. Elise Diane's voice brought her back to the present. "Your orders." In that moment of hesitation, Elise received another message, this one from Nancy Blackwell. Both incidents trending nationwide. Public connecting them as evidence of company culture. Press inquiring about official response. The decision crystallized. This wasn't about one seat or one passenger. It was about the pattern, about who was believed automatically and who was questioned, about who was asked to move and who was accommodated. Diane Elise said finally, "I'm initiating Protocol 47. There was a momentary silence on the line. Protocol 47 was Elise's recently implemented procedure for situations involving potential discrimination or bias that could affect passenger safety or dignity. It allowed for immediate intervention, including removal of crew members or passengers if necessary, and required full documentation." "Understood," Diane replied. "Are you formally taking operational command?" "Yes. Effective immediately. Acknowledged. Stand by for announcement." Elise ended the call and turned to find Richard watching her, suspicion evident in his expression. "Important call?" he asked sarcastically. "Yes, actually." Before he could respond, the cabin speakers activated again. Captain Reynolds' voice filled the aircraft. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to an ongoing situation that requires attention, our departure will be delayed. We've been instructed to return to the gate. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened while we complete this process." A collective groan rose from the cabin. Richard's face flushed with anger. "This is your doing, isn't it?" Elise didn't answer. She checked her secure line. Multiple messages had arrived during her call with the captain. From Nancy Blackwell. Crisis escalating. Both incidents trending nationwide. Major news outlets picking up story. From Anthony Ramirez. Emergency board meeting called. Thomas mobilizing allies. Need your statement, ASAP. From James Cooper. Mother and son in 32B, visibly distressed. Johnson making situation worse. Teresa maintaining protocol. The final message was from Diane, gate return underway. Security standing by per protocol 47. Your orders. Elise typed rapidly. Full documentation of both incidents. Prepare passenger and crew statements. Coordinate with Cooper for witness accounts. Richard was openly staring at her now, realization dawning. You're not just some random passenger, he said slowly. Who are you really? Elise met his gaze directly. Someone who believes every passenger deserves dignity, Mr. Whitman, regardless of the seat they occupy. The aircraft began its slow return to the terminal. Throughout the cabin, passengers speculated about the delay, many connecting it to the confrontations they'd witnessed or heard about. Richard pulled out his phone again, frantically typing. The board will have your job for this, he hissed. You can't ground an aircraft over a seating dispute. This isn't about a seating dispute, Elise replied evenly. This is about a pattern of behavior that undermines the dignity and safety of our passengers. In economy, Teresa had returned to row 32. Ms. Taylor, she said quietly to Denise, we're returning to the gate to address your concerns properly. Relief washed over Denise's face. Thank you. It wasn't just you, Teresa explained. There was a similar situation in first class. The airline is taking both incidents very seriously. Heather Johnson appeared at Teresa's side, her expression tense. What's happening? The captain didn't notify senior cabin crew about a gate return. It appears the decision came from higher authority, Teresa replied. What higher authority? The captain has final say on the aircraft. Not always, Teresa said simply, her gaze drifting momentarily toward the front of the plane. As the plane docked at the jetway, James Cooper approached Elise. We're ready, he said quietly. Elise nodded and stood smoothing her blazer. Richard rose as well, blocking her path. Whatever game you're playing stops now, he warned. I'm calling Thomas. Feel free, Elise replied calmly, though I suspect he's rather busy at the moment. She stepped past him into the aisle. The cabin had gone quiet, all eyes on her as she moved with quiet authority toward the front of the aircraft. As she walked, Elise felt the weight of the moment. What had begun as a routine, anonymous review flight had transformed into something far more significant. The incidents today, both in first class and economy, revealed aspects of SkyLine's culture that needed addressing regardless of the political consequences to her personally. Her phone buzzed with a message from Anthony. Thomas has called emergency board meeting in 2 hours. Claims operational interference. Be prepared. Elise pocketed her phone without responding. The board politics would sort themselves out later. Right now, her priority was addressing the immediate situation with clarity and purpose. James handed her a microphone connected to the cabin announcement system. Elise took a moment to gather her thoughts, aware that what happened next would define not just her leadership, but potentially the future of the airline itself. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice clear and steady. I apologize for the delay in our departure. My name is Elise Morgan, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of SkyLine Airlines. A wave of whispers swept through the cabin. Richard's face went pale. Today I witnessed behavior on this aircraft that does not reflect the values of this company or the experience we strive to provide for our passengers. Every person who boards a SkyLine flight deserves to be treated with respect and dignity regardless of their appearance, background, or the seat they occupy. She paused, allowing her words to resonate. We are returning to the gate to address specific incidents properly and ensure that all passengers feel safe and respected before we continue our journey. For those with connecting flights, our ground team will be assisting with rebooking options. Richard had sunk back into his seat, phone in hand, desperately trying to contact his allies. I want to thank those of you who stood up for your fellow passengers today. Your actions remind us that creating a respectful environment is everyone's responsibility. Elise handed the microphone back to James. Throughout the cabin, passengers exchanged glances, some confused, others nodding in approval. In economy, Denise Taylor held her son closer, tears of relief in her eyes. As the jetway connected and the cabin door opened, Elise turned to Richard one final time. "Mr. Whitman," she said quietly, "I believe this is where our paths diverge." His response was a strangled whisper. "You've just declared war on the wrong people, Morgan. The board will have your job for this." Elise's expression remained impassive, but her words carried unmistakable resolve. Perhaps. But some principles are worth fighting for, even at great cost. She turned and walked toward the exit where James stood waiting. Behind her, the confrontation that had begun over a single airplane seat had set in motion a reckoning that would transform an entire airline. The terminal fell silent as Elise Morgan stepped off the jetway, her presence commanding attention without effort. Airport staff who had been briefed on the situation stood at attention. Nearby passengers paused their conversations, sensing something significant was unfolding. Behind Elise came James Cooper, tablet in hand, his expression professionally neutral despite the unprecedented situation. Then Richard Whitman, his earlier confidence replaced by barely contained fury, as he realized the full extent of his miscalculation. "Ms. Morgan, a ground supervisor approached security is standing by as requested." "Thank you," Elise replied. "Please ensure all passengers are treated with courtesy during this delay. Priority assistance for those with connections." Richard pushed forward. "This is corporate sabotage," he declared loudly. "Grounding a flight for personal vendettas. The shareholders will hear about this." Several passengers had emerged behind him, phones recording the confrontation. Elise turned to face him, her calm in stark contrast to his agitation. "Mr. Whitman, this isn't about you or me. This is about establishing clear standards for how people are treated on our aircraft. You're using your position to settle personal scores," he accused. "I didn't know I would be on this flight until yesterday," Elise corrected him. "You, however, knew exactly who I was from the moment you saw my name on the manifest. Yet you still chose to demand my seat and refused to move when asked." Richard's eyes widened slightly. "You're twisting what happened." "The footage speaks for itself," James noted, nodding toward the passengers still recording. From the jetway emerged Teresa Ramirez, escorting Denise and Michael Taylor. Heather Johnson followed, her professional demeanor intact, but tension evident in her posture. When Michael spotted Elise, recognition flashed across his face. "Mom," he whispered excitedly, tugging at Denise's sleeve. "That's the lady from the magazine, the one who became boss of the whole airline." Denise looked up, surprise registering as she made the connection. "Ms. Taylor." Elise approached them. "I want to personally apologize for your experience today." Denise's expression reflected cautious appreciation. "You're really the CEO?" "Yes. And I was in first class when Mr. Whitman decided my assigned seat belonged to him instead." Understanding dawned on Denise's face. "So that's why?" "Yes," Elise confirmed. "When I learned about what was happening with you and Michael, it became clear we were looking at a pattern, not isolated incidents." Michael looked up at Elise with wide eyes. "You control all the planes." A genuine smile warmed Elise's features. "Not personally. We have excellent pilots for that. But I am responsible for making sure everyone on those planes is treated properly." "Even kids?" Michael asked. "Especially kids," Elise affirmed. "Particularly ones who love aviation enough to bring their own reference books on board." Michael beamed, clutching his book tighter. Richard watched this exchange with growing alarm. The narrative was slipping further from his control with each passing moment. He pulled out his phone again, frantically typing. A distinguished man in a tailored suit approached from the terminal. Anthony Ramirez, SkyLine board member and longtime advocate for Elise's leadership. His arrival signaled that news of the incident had reached the highest levels of corporate governance. Elise Anthony greeted her with a respectful nod. "I came as soon as I heard." "Thank you, Anthony," she replied. "I've initiated Protocol 47. Richard inserted himself into their conversation. "Ramirez, you need to get control of this situation. She's creating a PR disaster over nothing." Anthony regarded him coolly. "From what I understand, Richard, you created this situation when you refused to sit in your assigned seat and then made disparaging remarks to our CEO." "I didn't know she was the CEO," Richard protested. "Would your behavior have been acceptable toward any passenger?" Anthony countered. The question hung in the air, damning in its simplicity. Nearby, Heather Johnson was engaged in intense conversation with James Cooper, her gestures becoming increasingly defensive as he reviewed what appeared to be passenger statements on his tablet. "I was simply trying to resolve the situation efficiently," she insisted. The complainant was a premium passenger with obvious privacy concerns. "Our protocols are clear," James replied evenly. "Witness statements take precedence over assumptions based on passenger appearance or status." Teresa approached Elise. "Ms. Morgan, we've collected statements from witnesses in both cabins. Multiple passengers confirm Mr. Whitman's behavior and the unfounded accusations against Michael." "Thank you, Teresa," Elise said. "Your professionalism today has been exemplary." Teresa straightened slightly at the recognition. "I was just following the new protocols, ma'am." "Exactly," Elise noted. "That's all I've ever asked of our team, to follow procedures designed to treat all passengers with equal respect." A commotion near the terminal entrance drew their attention. Thomas Edwards had arrived, flanked by 2 other board members. His face was flushed with exertion as he hurried toward them. "Morgan," he called out. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Before Elise could respond, Anthony stepped forward. "Thomas, this isn't the venue for board-level discussions. It became the venue when she grounded a flight for personal reasons," Thomas retorted. "For documented incidents of passenger mistreatment?" Anthony corrected him. "Both caught on camera and already viral online." Thomas lowered his voice, leaning closer to Elise and Anthony. "Do you have any idea how much this stunt is going to cost? Hundreds of passengers, delayed connection issues, crew overtime, all because Richard took your precious seat." "This isn't about a seat," Elise replied evenly. "This is about the culture we're building at SkyLine. When 2 separate incidents on one flight show the same pattern of certain passengers being treated as less valuable than others, that demands immediate attention." James approached discreetly, showing Elise his tablet. "Ms. Morgan, I've received a concerning message. It appears Mr. Edwards instructed Captain Reynolds to disregard Protocol 47 before you officially took command." Elise reviewed the evidence, a time-stamped communication, showing Thomas had attempted to override safety protocols by pressuring the captain directly. This wasn't just a political disagreement anymore. It was a direct violation of company policy and potentially FAA regulations. Thomas Elise said quietly, "We should continue this discussion privately." "There's nothing to discuss," he snapped. "You've overstepped your authority. The board will address this immediately." Anthony studied the tablet James was holding, his expression hardening. "Thomas, attempting to override safety protocols is a serious matter. I suggest you consider your next steps carefully." Thomas glanced at Richard, then at the Taylors who stood nearby with Teresa. His expression hardened. "Emergency board meeting. 1 hour," he stated flatly. "Until then, you're relieved of operational control." Anthony shook his head. "You don't have that authority, Thomas. Only the full board can remove the CEO's operational authority, and only with a supermajority vote. Thomas's jaw tightened as he realized his overreach. More passengers had gathered around, many recording the confrontation on their phones. The public nature of the situation severely limited his options. Fine, he conceded. But this flight needs to depart. It will, Elise assured him. Once we've properly documented what occurred and ensured all passengers feel safe continuing their journey. She turned to address the growing crowd of onlookers. Ladies and gentlemen, SkyLine representatives will be assisting anyone with connection concerns. For those continuing to New York on this flight, we anticipate departure within the hour. Thank you for your patience and understanding. Her simple, direct communication had an immediate calming effect on the frustrated passengers. Richard, watching his advantage evaporate, made one final attempt to regain control. "She's manipulating this entire situation," he announced loudly, "using minor misunderstandings to push her agenda. Ask yourselves why a CEO would be flying commercial in the first place, if not to stage something like this." A woman in the crowd responded immediately, "Maybe to see how her airline actually treats people." Murmurs of agreement spread through the onlookers. Richard's face reddened further. "You're all being played. This is about corporate politics, not passenger welfare." Michael Taylor, who had been listening intently, suddenly spoke up. "You were mean to her first," he said with a child's simple clarity, "just like that man was mean to me. For no reason." A hush fell over the crowd. The fundamental truth in the boy's observation cut through the corporate doublespeak and justifications. Elise knelt to Michael's eye level. "You're absolutely right, Michael. And that's exactly why we're addressing this. Because how we treat each other matters, whether we're in first class or economy." Standing again, she faced the assembled crowd, her voice clear and resolute. SkyLine is committed to creating an environment where every passenger is treated with dignity. Today we fell short of that standard, and for that I apologize. But accountability matters. That's why we've paused this journey, not to inconvenience anyone, but to ensure that when we do take off, everyone on board knows they belong there. As Elise finished speaking, Nancy Blackwell arrived, tablet in hand, looking both concerned and impressed. "It's gone national," she informed Elise quietly. "Major networks are picking it up." "Dignity. In-flight is trending," Thomas overheard and paled visibly. What had begun as a confrontation over a seat assignment had transformed into a defining moment for the airline and for Elise Morgan's leadership. Richard, realizing he was now the villain in a story rapidly spinning beyond his control, turned to Thomas with desperation in his eyes. "Do something." But Thomas, ever sensitive to public perception, took a step back. "We'll address this at the board meeting," he said carefully, unwilling to align himself too closely with Richard's increasingly untenable position. Elise observed this subtle distancing with quiet understanding. The battle was far from over, but the field had shifted in her favor. She caught Anthony's eye, and he gave her a slight nod of approval. Ms. Morgan James approached, lowering his voice. "Everything is documented. Captain Reynolds is ready to resume departure procedures whenever you give the word." "Thank you, James," Elise replied. "Please inform the captain we'll proceed in 15 minutes after all passengers have been properly reaccommodated or returned to their correct seats." As James moved to carry out her instructions, Elise turned back to Denise and Michael Taylor. "Will you be continuing to New York with us today?" she asked gently. Denise hesitated, her protective instincts evident. "I'm not sure." "I understand your concern," Elise acknowledged. "If you do choose to continue, I can assure you the situation has been addressed. But if you'd prefer, we can arrange alternative transportation at SkyLine's expense." Michael looked up at his mother hopefully. "I still want to fly, Mom. I need to see how the plane takes off." Denise smiled at her son's resilience. "If you're sure." "I am," he confirmed with surprising confidence. "Then we'll continue our journey." Denise decided. Assuming the gentleman with the confidential laptop has been moved, already arranged. Teresa confirmed with a small smile. Richard, overhearing this, turned to Thomas with renewed outrage. She's moving passengers around based on personal preference now. This is exactly the kind of operational interference the board has been concerned about. But Thomas was already backing away, his political instincts telling him which way the wind was blowing. We'll discuss all of this at the meeting, Richard. Left standing alone as the crowd dispersed, Richard Whitman watched his carefully constructed plan crumble. What should have been a simple power play, creating an incident that would demonstrate Elise's emotional leadership and professional inadequacy, had instead revealed the very values that made her effective as CEO. As passengers began reboarding, Elise approached Richard one final time. "Mr. Whitman," she said quietly, "you have two options. You can take your assigned seat 2B and continue to New York without further incident, or you can choose not to board. Either way, this aircraft will depart shortly." The power dynamic had completely reversed. Now it was Richard who had to decide whether to stay or go, while Elise stood firm in her rightful place. "This isn't over, Morgan," he warned. On that point, Elise agreed with surprising gentleness. "We are in complete agreement. If you've made it this far in our story of dignity, respect, and standing up for what's right, we hope it's touched something important in you. Perhaps you've been in a situation where someone tried to make you feel like you didn't belong. Or maybe you've witnessed injustice and wondered if speaking up would make a difference. The truth is, small acts of courage ripple outward in ways we can never fully predict. One person refusing to be moved from their rightful place, whether that's a seat on an airplane or a position they've earned through hard work, can transform not just a moment, but an entire culture." If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need its message, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of everyday heroes creating change through quiet dignity and unwavering resolve. Because in a world that often tells certain people they don't belong, the most revolutionary act is simply standing your ground.